Step away from the register and keep your hands where I can see
I
them.
already did. If the machine missed an item, I asked for help.
You're being detained.
On what charge?
Suspected theft.
The store can confirm in less than a minute that I never tried to leave and never refused payment.
Turn around. Get a supervisor on scene.
This patrolman thought he was in full control of a routine call at a grocery store. Then he made the worst decision of his career. He brushed off the identification in front of him, treated a minor checkout dispute like a criminal incident, and put an off-duty Navy commander in handcuffs in front of a store full of people. The whole thing looked one-sided for about a minute. Then the shift supervisor walked in, saw who was cuffed, and everything changed. Before we get into it, say where you're watching from in the comments. And if you follow stories about bad policing, abuse of authority, and real consequences, like and subscribe. This one is exactly about that. It started at a grocery store outside Norfolk on a Thursday evening. Busy checkout lines. People getting off work. Nothing unusual. The man at the center of it was Commander Daniel Mercer, 43, active duty Navy, off duty that night, still in plain clothes after a long day. He had stopped in to buy a few things before heading home. It should have taken 10 minutes. Mercer was not loud. He wasn't trying to impress anyone. He was the kind of man who stayed composed because that was how he lived. Years in command had trained that into him. He spoke clearly, paid attention, and didn't get rattled easily. That helped him later, because the officer who showed up was the exact opposite. The issue began at self-checkout. Small problem. One item didn't scan properly. Mercer noticed the total was off before finishing the transaction and called over an employee. That's all it was, a register problem. The employee was young, unsure, and called the floor manager instead of fixing it. The manager, Laura Bennett, came over already irritated. She looked at the screen, looked at the bagged items, and jumped straight to suspicion. Mercer explained that the machine had missed an item and that he had asked for help before completing payment. He pointed to the screen and told her to check the transaction. Bennett didn't do that. She started speaking to him like he had been caught trying to sneak something out. He corrected her, calmly. He told her he was not refusing to pay and was not leaving with unpaid items. He wanted the register fixed so he could finish and leave. That should have ended it. It didn't because Bennett took his calm tone the wrong way. She acted like he was being difficult because he wasn't backing down. She wanted the scene under control fast, and instead of solving the problem, she called police. That call brought Officer Ryan Kessler. Kessler came in like he was walking into a custody situation, not a store complaint. He didn't start by checking the register. He didn't ask the cashier what happened first. He didn't slow the scene down. Bennett gave him a version that made Mercer sound like a problem customer refusing to cooperate. Kessler accepted that version almost immediately. He walked up to Mercer and told him to step away from the checkout and explain what he was doing. Mercer did step away. Then he explained the issue from the beginning. Missed scan, manager overreaction, still trying to pay. Clear enough, Kessler didn't deal with any of that. He switched straight to authority. He asked for identification in a sharp tone. Mercer took out his wallet slowly and handed over his ID along with his military credentials. He wasn't making a speech. He wasn't trying to pull rank. He was identifying himself and showing exactly who he was. Kessler barely looked. That was the first real mistake. Mercer told him this was a checkout dispute, not a theft case. He said the store could verify the transaction in less than a minute if anyone bothered to check. Kessler didn't want to verify. He wanted a compliance first, facts later. He started talking over Mercer instead of listening to him. Then he treated every attempt to explain his attitude. That's how these situations go bad. Not because the facts are confusing, because one person decides he doesn't need them. Mercer stayed steady. He repeated that he had not tried to leave, had not refused payment, and had already identified himself. Kessler kept pushing. He told Mercer to stop arguing and follow instructions. Mercer answered that he was cooperating, but he was not going to agree to something false just to make the officer comfortable. That line got under Kessler's skin. He stepped closer, his tone changed. Now it wasn't about the store anymore, it was about obedience. He started framing Mercer as non-compliant, even though Mercer was standing there, answering questions and not doing anything aggressive. The cashier at the next station stopped pretending to work and just watched. A couple of customers started paying attention. One woman pulled out her phone. She could tell this was turning into something it never needed to become. Mercer saw it too. He kept his voice level and told Kessler again to review the transaction record and speak to the employee who had first responded. That would have settled the whole matter. Kessler ignored that and demanded Mercer put his hands where he could see them. Mercer did. Then Kessler told him he was being detained while they figured out what was going on. That made no sense, and Mercer said so. He told him there was no reason to detain him over a checkout error that store staff could fix on the screen right in front of them. Kessler answered the way officers answer when they know they don't have much, with volume and repetition. He told Mercer not to make it worse. Now people were watching openly. Bennett looked less confident because the scene had gone past what she expected. She wanted Mercer pressured. She didn't expect cuffs. The customers filming could already tell Kessler had skipped several steps. He had not checked the machine. He had not checked the receipt history. He had not checked the credentials in his hand. He had chosen the fastest path to force. Mercer understood exactly where it was going. He had dealt with enough authority figures in and out of the military to know when somebody had decided he needed to win in front of an audience. That was the dangerous part. Once ego takes over, the facts stop mattering. And that's where this turned from a stupid store dispute into a career-ending mistake. Officer Ryan Kessler had already handled the call badly inside the store. Part 2 is where he crossed the line. Once he said Daniel Mercer was being detained, he needed a real legal reason. He didn't have one. The register hadn't been checked. The transaction log hadn't been reviewed. The employee who first responded hadn't been properly questioned. Kessler still moved forward, like the facts were already settled. Mercer told him again that the machine had failed to scan one item, and that store staff could confirm that on the screen. Kessler cut him off and ordered him to turn around. Mercer asked what crime he was being detained for. Kessler answered with a vague line about interfering with an investigation. That was weak from the start, and people nearby could hear it. Mercer complied. Kessler put him in handcuffs right there near self-checkout. That was the moment the whole situation changed. Up to that point, this was still a bad response to a simple store problem. Once the cuffs went on, it became an unlawful detention in front of witnesses, cameras, and store employees who already knew the item had not scanned correctly. The customers around them understood that much almost immediately. They had watched Mercer stay in place, explain the same thing more than once, and offer identification. They had also watched Kessler skip the easy checks and go straight to force. A couple of people pulled out phones. One person near the next register stopped scanning groceries and just stared. The cashier who had first helped Mercer looked like he wanted no part of what was happening. Kessler still had Mercer's ID and military credentials. That made it worse. Mercer had identified himself. Kessler had chosen not to verify it before cuffing him. That wasn't confusion. That was ego. Mercer told him the cuffs were unnecessary and said the credentials could be confirmed in minutes. Kessler answered that he didn't care about rank or title. He thought that made him sound firm. It actually showed he was ignoring information that mattered to the stop. Then he started adding extra labels to the detention. Suspected theft, disorderly conduct. None of it fit. Mercer had not threatened anyone. He had not tried to leave. He had not caused a disturbance. Kessler was padding the scene because the original reason was already falling apart. A customer asked what Mercer had done. Kessler told everyone to step back and mind their business. That only made more people pay attention. Then one of the younger employees said what should have been said from the beginning. He told the manager the item had not scanned and that Mercer had asked for help. before finishing the transaction. Several customers heard that. So did Kessler. He ignored it. That told everyone exactly what kind of stop this was. He was no longer trying to figure out what happened. He was trying to protect the decision he had already made. Mercer told him to get a supervisor on scene before he made it worse. Clear sentence, direct point. Kessler didn't take the warning seriously. He acted like Mercer was just another customer trying to talk his way out of trouble. Then he moved Mercer toward the front of the store. That was another bad call. Now the detention was even more public. More customers saw the cuffs. More phones came up. Someone near the entrance started recording from farther back, which gave a full view of the scene. Mercer did not argue. He told one bystander to keep recording. Smart move. He understood exactly what mattered now. Outside in the parking lot, Kessler radioed dispatch and gave a version that made him sound in control. He reported a non-compliant male involved in a suspected theft incident. That statement mattered later because it showed he was shaping the record before checking basic facts. Mercer stood by the patrol car in handcuffs, while Kessler searched him and removed his wallet, phone, and keys. Then Kessler looked again at the military credentials. This time, he slowed down. He was starting to understand they were real. But by then, the damage had already been done. Mercer told him again to verify the ID and review the store footage. Kessler said nothing useful. He kept moving, kept talking into the radio, kept acting like he still had the upper hand. Inside the store, manager Laura Bennett had finally realized this was not going away. She told an employee to save the self-checkout record and preserve the camera footage. She was not helping Mercer. She was protecting herself. Then another patrol vehicle pulled into the lot. That was when Ryan Kessler's confidence started to break. Lieutenant Sarah Duran arrived before Kessler had time to clean up his own mess. That mattered. A few more minutes and he might have shaped the whole report around his version first. She stepped out, looked at the scene, and understood right away that something was off. Grocery store parking lot. Handcuffed man in plain clothes. No active threat. No stolen property laid out. No upset victim demanding action. Just Officer Ryan Kessler standing beside a patrol car trying to look in control. Kessler started talking before she even finished walking up. He gave her the quick version officers use when they want the supervisor moving in their direction from the start. Suspected theft. Uncooperative subject. Ongoing investigation. He was trying to frame Mercer as the problem before she asked her own questions. Duran didn't buy it that fast. She asked what had been taken. Kessler said the store believed Mercer had failed to pay for merchandise. She asked whether the register record had been checked. He said not yet. She asked whether store video had been reviewed. No. She asked whether the employee who handled the transaction had been interviewed. Not fully, that was already bad. Then she asked why the man was in cuffs. Kessler said Mercer had been argumentative and was interfering. That answer hurt him more than it helped. It was thin, and Duran knew it. Then she turned to Mercer. He identified himself as Commander Daniel Mercer, United States Navy. He told her he had presented both civilian and military identification before being cuffed. He explained the register issue in one straight line. One item failed to scan. He asked for help. The manager assumed theft. The officer escalated before checking the facts. No speeches, no attitude, just a clean summary. Then Duran asked to see the credentials. Kessler handed them over. That was the moment his control of the scene ended. She looked at the IDs, read them properly, and her expression changed. Not dramatic, just immediate. She asked Mercer his command affiliation. He answered. She asked one follow-up question that someone outside that world would not think to ask. Mercer answered that too, without hesitation. That was enough. She knew the identification was real, and more important, she knew Kessler had ignored it before using force. Then she asked the store manager to come outside. Laura Bennett walked out already nervous. Duran asked her to explain exactly what Mercer had done. Bennett gave a weaker version than the one she probably gave Kessler inside. She said there had been a checkout issue and concern about unpaid merchandise. Duran asked whether Mercer tried to leave. Bennett admitted he had not. She asked whether he refused to pay. Bennett admitted he had asked to fix the scan issue. She asked whether anyone had checked the machine record before police put him in cuffs. Bennett said no. That was enough to settle it. Duran told Kessler to remove the handcuffs. No long discussion. No face-saving language, just the order. He hesitated for a second. Small mistake. Duran repeated it sharper this time. Then he took the cuffs off. Mercer brought his hands forward and rubbed his wrists once. He didn't rant. He didn't posture. He let the scene speak for itself. That made Kessler look even worse, because now everyone in that parking lot could see the difference between the two men. One had stayed under control the whole time. The other had escalated a grocery store dispute into a detention with no proper basis. Duran asked another officer to separate Kessler from the scene. That was the public collapse. A few minutes earlier, he'd been running the stop. Now he was being moved away from the subject, away from the manager, and away from the witnesses while his supervisor took over. The customer's recording caught that too. They understood exactly what it meant. Once a supervisor sidelines the original officer in public, the damage is already serious. Duran then did what Kessler should have done from the start. She had the cashier brought out. The cashier confirmed Mercer had flagged the scanning problem before completing the transaction. She had the self-checkout record pulled. It matched Mercer's account. One item had not registered correctly, no completed theft, no attempt to leave, no criminal conduct that justified cuffs. Then she looked back at Kessler. He tried one more time to defend himself. He said Mercer was being difficult and that he had to make a fast decision. Duran shut that down immediately. She told him this was not a fast-moving, violent call. He had time to check the facts and chose not to. That's what buried him. Mercer then made his position clear. He said he wanted the names and badge numbers of every officer involved. He wanted confirmation that all Bodycam footage would be preserved. He wanted the store advised to keep all checkout and surveillance records. He also stated that he would be filing both civilian and military complaints. That changed the temperature again. A random shopper filing a complaint is one thing. An active-duty Navy commander with documented unlawful detention, multiple witnesses, store records, and Bodycam footage is something else. Duran knew it. Kessler knew it. Bennett knew it too. Kessler had nothing useful left to say. The attitude from inside the store was gone. He looked like every officer looks when the report he planned to write is already falling apart in real time. And the worst part for him was simple. This had not happened during some chaotic felony stop. It happened over one missed scan at a grocery store. The fallout started that same night. Lieutenant Sarah Duran removed Ryan Kessler from field duty before the shift ended. His body cam, radio traffic, and incident notes were locked down. The store was ordered to preserve checkout logs and surveillance. By the next morning, customer videos were already circulating locally, and the department knew it had a serious problem. Commander Daniel Mercer did exactly what Kessler should have expected. He filed a formal complaint with the department, notified Navy legal channels, and retained civilian counsel. He kept it measured. No grandstanding. Just facts, timestamps, witnesses, and footage. Internal affairs moved fast because the case was clean. Kessler had ignored identification, skipped basic verification, used handcuffs without a solid legal basis, and then tried to justify it after the fact. That combination ended him. He was suspended, then terminated after the administrative investigation. His state certification was also challenged, which effectively closed the door on working patrol again. By 2026, the civil case was still remembered as one of the department's most damaging avoidable incidents. The city resolved the claim before trial under pressure from the footage, witness statements, and the department's own findings. The department also changed policy after the scandal. Officers now had to document verification steps in retail detention calls before using restraints unless there was a real safety threat. Supervisory review requirements were tightened. Military and government credential verification got added to refresher training because ignoring ID had become one of the biggest embarrassment points in the whole case. The bigger lesson was simple. Kessler thought authority meant he could force the facts to fit his mood. It doesn't work like that. One bad ego call in a grocery store cost him his badge, cost the city money, and damaged trust for no reason. That's the story. What would you have done if you were standing there watching it happen? Put your thoughts in the comments. Share this with someone who needs to see it, and subscribe for more stories like this.
Pack your things up. You need to leave the park.
Why?
Suspicious activity.
Suspicious activity by who?
That's what we're here to figure out.
Are you giving me a lawful order or are you asking us to leave?
ID, now.
Why are there 3 officers around my
What happens when the people sworn to enforce the law step past their limits in front of someone who knows exactly where those limits end? A quiet afternoon at the park turned into a tense public stop when police detained a mixed-race family without giving a clear reason. What they did not know was that the father was a U.S. Marshal, and the entire stop started breaking down the moment his identity came out. Tell me where you're watching from, and if you like stories about overreach, accountability, and people who stay calm under pressure, like and subscribe. This one shows how fast a normal family day can turn into a public humiliation when officers start with assumptions and work backward. The family had been at the park for less than an hour. Elias Carter was there with his wife Naomi and their 2 children. It was a normal Saturday. Playground, snacks, kids moving between the swings and the open grass, other families nearby. Nothing unusual. No argument. No disturbance. No one paying them special attention. Then a patrol car pulled up near the entrance. At first, Elias thought the officers were there for something else. That lasted maybe a few seconds. The moment they stepped out, looked across the park, and headed straight for his family. It was clear who they had come for. Officer Brent Keller approached first. He acted like the decision had already been made. He told the family to collect their things and leave the park. No clear explanation, no specific complaint, no law, just an order. Elias stood up and asked the first question that mattered. He asked why. Keller said they were responding to suspicious activity, that was it, nothing specific. He did not describe a report. He did not say what anyone had done. He did not point to a rule. He just kept the language broad enough to sound official. Naomi asked suspicious activity by who? Fair question. No real answer. That was the first sign the stop had no clean foundation. Elias kept his voice level. He asked whether the officer was giving a lawful order or making a request. Keller did not answer that directly either. He repeated that the family needed to leave. That exchange changed the tone. The second officer moved in closer. Not aggressive yet, just close enough to tighten the space around the family. Another stayed a few steps back and watched. The officers were creating pressure before they had justified the stop. Elias noticed it right away. He had seen that pattern before. Take control first, explain later. Hope the target gets nervous and gives you something to use. He did not give them that. He told Naomi to stay with the children. Then he faced the officers again and asked if he was being detained. Again, no clear answer. Keller shifted to identification. He told Elias to provide ID. Elias asked the next obvious question. He asked what legal basis they had to demand identification from a man standing in a public park with his family when they had not stated a crime. That irritated Keller. You could see the stop moving from vague to personal. He said Elias was making things harder than they needed to be. That is usually the moment an officer starts setting up the next step. Not because the citizen has done something dangerous, because the officer does not like being questioned. A few people in the park had started watching by then. 2 parents near the playground, a man walking his dog, someone sitting on a bench near the path. It was still quiet, but people were paying attention now. Naomi was watching the officers and the children at the same time. Their daughter had gone silent. Their son had moved closer to her side. Kids know when adults stop sounding normal. A third officer told Naomi to keep the children back and step away from Elias. That made the stop worse. Fast. Now they were separating the parents in front of the kids, and they still had not explained what justified any of it. Elias said that out loud. He said they were escalating the contact without stating clear cause. He also said that if he was being detained, he wanted that stated clearly on camera. That mattered. By then, at least 2 bystanders had phones out. Keller heard it. He looked at the phones. Then he looked back at Elias. His tone got sharper. He told Elias to stop arguing and provide identification immediately. Elias did not argue. He kept asking direct questions. He wanted the officers to commit to a reason. He knew vague language sounds a lot weaker once people replay it later. One of the officers moved to Elias's side and reached toward his arm. Elias immediately said he was not resisting. He kept his hands visible. He told him again that he did not consent to being detained without cause. That should have slowed the stop down. It did not. Keller said they were going to detain him while they figured things out. That line told everyone watching exactly what this was. They were taking control first and looking for justification second. Naomi stepped forward half a pace and demanded to know why her husband was being detained. She did not shout. She sounded scared and angry, which made sense because her children were watching officers close in on their father for no stated reason in the middle of a public park. One of the kids started crying. A woman near the benches could be heard saying the family had not done anything. Another bystander raised a phone higher to get a clear shot of the scene. Elias stayed steady. That was the only thing keeping it from getting worse. He told Naomi to stay with the kids. Then he started doing something the officers clearly did not expect. He began documenting the stop out loud. He stated the time. He noted the number of officers. He repeated that no one had given a clear legal basis for the detention. He asked for names and badge numbers. He asked again whether he was free to leave. No one answered that cleanly. Keller then ordered Elias to put his hands behind his back. Elias did not fight. He did not raise his voice. He said he would not resist, but he wanted it noted that he had asked repeatedly for the legal basis of the stop and had not been given one. That was when the scene fully turned. More people were filming now. Naomi was trying to keep the children close while also watching her husband get restrained in front of them. Keller had started the stop like he owned it. At that point, he looked less certain. Not because he suddenly understood the law, because he understood that people were recording and Elias was staying calm enough to make every weak answer stand out. The officers still did not know who he was. That part was coming next. Keller ordered Elias to put his hands behind his back. Elias complied. He turned slowly and said he was not resisting. He also said he wanted the reason for the detention stated clearly on camera. No one gave one. 2 officers cuffed him while Naomi and the children watched from a few feet away. That was the moment the stop changed. It was no longer an argument over leaving the park. It was now a public detention with no clear legal basis. Naomi asked why her husband was being handcuffed. An officer told her to stay back with the children. That was the answer she got. Not a charge, not an explanation, just another command. Their daughter started crying. Their son moved closer to Naomi and kept looking at the cuffs. The officers kept working like this was routine. It was not. Elias stayed focused. He asked 3 direct questions. Was he under arrest or only detained? What offense were they claiming? Who was the supervisor coming to the scene? Those were basic questions. The officers still would not answer them properly. Keller said they were investigating and needed to identify him. That made the problem worse, not better. They had already put him in cuffs and still could not explain what crime they thought had happened. A man near the walking path said the family had been sitting there the whole time. Another bystander asked what law had been broken. Keller told both of them to stay back. More phones came out. One officer asked Elias where his identification was. Elias said his wallet was in the family bag near the bench. Then he made another point clearly. He said he did not consent to any search beyond what the officers believed they were legally allowed to do. Naomi immediately watched the bag. She understood what was happening. The officers had started with a weak stop, then a detention, and now they were moving into the family's belongings. A younger officer walked to the bench and picked up the bag anyway. Naomi objected right away. She asked why they were opening family property when no one had explained the detention. The officers said they were trying to identify Elias. He found the wallet and handed it to Keller. Keller checked the driver's license. That should have slowed everything down. It did not. He looked at the card, then back at Elias, and kept pushing. He asked whether Elias had any weapons on him. That question changed the stop. Elias answered carefully. He said he was lawfully armed in an official capacity. He also said he wanted a supervisor present before that went any further. The officers reacted to that, not with panic, more with confusion. One looked at Keller. Another stopped moving and watched. Naomi caught it too. She could tell the answer had landed. Keller asked what official capacity meant. Elias did not rush. He said he would identify himself fully when the supervisor arrived. Until then, he wanted the detention documented properly. That answer was controlled and deliberate. He was not refusing to identify himself. He was making sure the officers sat in the stop they had already created. Keller got on the radio and called for a sergeant. The wording mattered. He requested a supervisor at the park and described Elias as a detained male with armed status needing clarification. That was not neutral language. He was already framing the story in a way that protected himself. Elias said so right away. He stated that he had not resisted, had not threatened anyone, and had repeatedly asked for the legal basis of the detention. He also said the officers were trying to justify the stop after the fact. A woman filming near the playground said the whole thing was on video. A man near the path said they still had not explained why they grabbed him. The officers ignored them, but the scene was getting harder to control. One of the children asked Naomi if they were taking their father away. She stayed with the kids and did her best to keep them calm, but it was obvious the damage was already done. The children had seen their father cuffed in public for no reason they could understand. Elias kept asking for names and badge numbers. One officer gave his name. Keller did not. He said the family could get that information later through the department. That was another bad sign. The sergeant had still not arrived. So the officers stayed there with Elias in cuffs, his wife and children a few feet away, and several bystanders recording from different angles. Keller looked at the wallet again. Then he asked Elias what he did for work. This time, Elias answered. He said he was a deputy United States Marshal. That stopped the scene cold. Keller's face changed first. Then the officer beside him looked at the wallet again. The younger officer near the bench froze for a second. Naomi said nothing, but she could see they finally understood who they had detained. And for them, that made everything worse, not better. The stop changed the second Elias said what he did for a living. He said he was a deputy U.S. Marshal. Keller looked back at the wallet, then pulled out the federal credentials. Another officer checked them too. Nobody had much to say after that. The confidence was gone. A minute earlier, they had been talking over him, cuffing him in front of his wife and kids, and acting like they could sort the reason out later. Now they understood they had detained a federal officer in public, with cameras pointed at them from every direction. Keller called for the sergeant again. This time his voice was different, shorter, more careful. He asked dispatch to verify the credentials right away. Elias kept control of the record. He said clearly that he had asked for the legal basis of the detention from the start and had never been given one. He said no officer had named a crime before putting him in cuffs. He wanted that on every recording. Dispatch confirmed the credentials. That ended any doubt. Naomi looked at the officers and could see it on their faces. They were not trying to control the scene anymore. They were waiting for a supervisor to clean it up. Sergeant Hargrove arrived a minute later. He took one look at Elias in cuffs, the family, the bystanders filming, and knew the stop was already a problem. Keller tried to explain it fast, but Hargrove checked the credentials himself and walked straight to Elias. He said they needed to de-escalate. Elias answered that they should have thought about that before detaining him in front of his wife and children without stating cause. Then he asked for the sergeant's name, badge number, and confirmation that the detention was being documented. Hargrove told an officer to remove the cuffs. Once they were off, Elias asked the question that mattered most. What was the legal basis for the detention? Hargrove did not answer directly. He said officers had received a call and were investigating. Same weak answer, just in a calmer voice. Naomi then asked whether anyone was going to explain to the children why their father had been handcuffed. Hargrove had nothing useful for that. Elias stayed with facts. He requested every officer's name and badge number. He asked for the incident number. He asked whether all body cameras had been running from the start. Now the officers gave answers. That was the real shift. Not just that they knew who he was. It was that the stop had become a documented problem. They could no longer talk their way around. Once the cuffs came off, Hargrove tried to bring the temperature down and move the family out of the moment. That did not work. Elias was done accepting vague language. He asked for the incident number. He asked which officer had made first contact. He asked whether the department was treating this as a documented detention. Hargrove answered carefully because by then he knew this was headed far beyond a park supervisor note. Naomi stayed focused on the children first. That came before everything else. Their daughter was still crying on and off. Their son had stopped asking questions, which was worse. He just stayed close and watched every officer like he did not know what they might do next. That is what these stops do to families. Even after the pressure comes off, the damage stays in the air. The bystanders did not just walk away either. A few came over once the officers stepped back. One woman said she had recorded the whole thing from the moment Elias was first surrounded. A man near the path said he had the handcuffing on video from another angle. Another parent said the family had been sitting there peacefully the whole time and offered to give a statement. That was bad news for the department. Not because one complaint was coming, because a full timeline was coming. Elias took names and contact information. He did not make a speech. He did not threaten anybody. He just collected facts. Witnesses, video angles, timestamps, officer names, supervisor name, badge numbers, incident details. He knew exactly how these cases go. Departments get selective when the record is thin. This record was not thin. The officers left the park one unit at a time. No apology worth hearing, no real explanation, just the usual effort to back out without saying the obvious part out loud. But the obvious part was already sitting in multiple phones. That night, the video started moving. First local posts, then community pages, then bigger accounts that focus on police misconduct and public encounters. The clip that hit hardest was not the identity reveal. It was the part before that. Elias standing calm, Naomi asking basic questions, the children watching their father get cuffed while officers refused to say clearly what he had done. That is the part people reacted to. By the next morning, the department had a problem it could not bury under standard language. A mixed-race family had been detained in a public park. The father turned out to be a U.S. Marshal. The officers had no strong public explanation, and too many people had video. The department released the usual statement. They said they were aware of the incident. They said they had opened an internal review. They said professionalism and public trust mattered. Same script departments use when they do not want to admit the real issue on day one. It did not calm anything down. Local reporters picked it up, then regional outlets. Then national pages started running the story because the facts were simple and ugly. Officers approached a family in a public space. They escalated without a clear reason. They cuffed the father in front of his children. Then they found out he was federal law enforcement and suddenly wanted to slow everything down. That kind of story spreads because people recognize the pattern. Elias and Naomi filed formal complaints, not emotional ones, detailed ones. They included the sequence of events, the exact questions asked, the lack of clear answers, the names of witnesses, and the existence of multiple videos. Elias also made sure the complaint addressed the children being present during the detention. That part mattered to him. This was not just about him being cuffed. It was about what his family had been put through. The review did not stay internal for long. Once the body camera footage was pulled, the department had another problem. The officers' public behavior matched what the bystanders had recorded. The questions were there. The vague answers were there. The detention came before any clear legal basis was stated. That is hard to defend when everything is on camera. Keller was pulled from patrol during the investigation. Hargrove caught review too, not for starting the stop, but for how he handled the fallout once he arrived. The department also had to answer a bigger question. Why had a family in a public park become a detention scene so quickly in the first place? That is where these stories stopped being about one officer. The city asked for an outside review. Civil rights groups got involved. Community meetings got louder. More people came forward with their own stories about vague stops, aggressive tone, and officers using suspicion like it was enough by itself. That is how one public incident turns into a wider problem. Not because the department suddenly discovers misconduct exists, because the cameras finally make denial harder. For Elias, the result was not some movie-style victory. He was still angry. Naomi was still angry. The children had questions for weeks. Public accountability does not erase that part. It just means the humiliation does not disappear without a record. The family changed parks for a while. The kids noticed every patrol car after that. Naomi noticed too. Elias did what trained people do. He kept moving, kept documenting, kept the focus on process. But he knew exactly what the park stop had done. It took an ordinary family afternoon and turned it into evidence. In the months that followed, the department changed its public contact guidance for park stops and non-criminal detentions. Supervisory response rules got tighter. Officers were retrained on detention standards, identification demands, and public space encounters. None of that happened out of goodwill. It happened because the department had been cornered by footage, witnesses, and a man who knew exactly how to preserve the truth. That is the lesson here. Authority is not the same thing as legality. A badge does not erase the need for cause. And when officers start with pressure instead of facts, the smartest thing a person can do is stay calm, ask clear questions, and make sure the moment is documented. What would you have done in that situation? Have you ever seen officers act like they could explain themselves later and control people first? Put it in the comments. Share the story with someone who needs to hear it, and subscribe for more stories about power, pressure, and what happens when the wrong people pick the wrong target.
Turn around and put your hands on the hood.
For what? You still haven't told me why I was stopped.
Do what I said.
I'm asking for the legal reason.
You're acting suspicious.
What happens when a local patrol officer stops a driver, sees federal credentials, and still decides to push forward like none of that matters? One roadside detention turned into a legal mess. The second that officer ignored what was in front of him. Was he being careful, or was he trying to force control after the stop stopped making sense? That question followed the case from the shoulder of the road all the way into federal court. Tell me where you're watching from, and if you follow stories about body cam evidence, bad stops, and real consequences when officers cross the line, like the video and subscribe. His name was Daniel Mercer. He was an undercover FBI asset working around a sensitive federal investigation in Metro Atlanta. On that evening, he was heading home after a long day downtown. He wasn't speeding, he wasn't weaving, he wasn't doing anything that stood out. He drove the way a lot of trained law enforcement people drive when they know any stop can become a problem. Slow, clean, careful. Around 7:45 p.m., he saw patrol lights in his mirror signaled, and pulled over near a gas station where the area was lit and visible. The patrol officer was Aaron Boone, 5 years on the job, already carrying himself like every simple stop was a test of authority. He walked up with his hand close to his weapon and asked for license and registration. Mercer answered the right way. He told Boone he was going to reach for the paperwork, then did it slowly. The registration came first, then the wallet. Inside the wallet were his driver's license and federal credentials. Boone saw them. That should have settled the stop. It didn't. Boone's tone got sharper, not calmer. He ordered Mercer out of the SUV. Mercer asked why he had been stopped. Boone didn't answer the question. He repeated the order, louder. That was the first sign the stop had stopped being professional. When an officer has a real reason, he usually says it. When he doesn't, he leans on pressure. A second unit arrived before Boone had even explained the stop. The backup officer moved to the passenger side and started scanning the inside of the vehicle. Mercer stepped out. He stayed calm. Dress shirt, slacks, work shoes. No aggressive posture. No argument for the sake of argument. He kept asking the same basic thing. What was the legal reason for the stop? Boone kept moving past that like it didn't matter. Boone put Mercer against the hood and patted him down harder than needed. Then the backup officer began searching the SUV. Mercer said clearly that he did not consent. They searched anyway. Console, glove box, under the seats. They were no longer checking something specific. They were looking for anything that could justify what Boone had already done. They found nothing. Boone then asked if there were weapons in the vehicle. Mercer answered directly. Yes, he was federally authorized to carry, and the weapon was secured in a locked compartment between the front seats. Boone removed it. By then, people at the gas station had started paying attention. A couple of them pulled out their phones. That changed the stop immediately. Boone was still in control of the scene, but now he was also being watched. Mercer still didn't give him anything useful. No yelling, no sudden movement, no resistance. That made Boone look worse every minute the stop continued. Officers like Boone expect panic or pushback because it gives them something to write down later. Mercer gave him neither. Then Boone ordered him to turn around and put his hands behind his back. Mercer asked what he was being detained for. Boone said suspicious activity. That was the explanation. A man driving lawfully, pulling over correctly, and showing valid federal identification was now being called suspicious. Boone cuffed him and put him in the back of the patrol car. Mercer asked for a supervisor. He asked more than once. He also asked Cest to make a phone call. Boone ignored both requests while he and the other officer kept searching the SUV. This is where the stop turned from bad judgment into ego. Boone already had enough information to slow down and verify. He chose not to. He had seen the credentials. He had heard the explanation. He knew Mercer wasn't some random guy inventing a story on the shoulder. But once Boone had committed to the detention, backing off would mean admitting he was wrong. So he doubled down. At one point, the officers found Mercer's work laptop and started to open it. Mercer told them it contained sensitive federal case material, and they had no authority to access it. That made them pause. For the first time, Boone looked like he understood he might be stepping into a situation bigger than he could control. About 45 minutes into the detention, a supervisor arrived. Her name was Sergeant Lena Ortiz. She spoke to Boone first. Boone told her he had made the stop because of a broken taillight. Ortiz checked the vehicle. The taillights were working. Boone then switched to a different reason. He said the SUV matched a vehicle tied to a robbery report from weeks earlier in another part of the city. Same stop. New story. That's where the whole thing started falling apart. Boone also told Ortiz that Mercer had been aggressive and uncooperative. That claim had a problem. The body cam was running. Witnesses had been recording too. Mercer had stayed controlled the entire time. No threats, no resistance, no scene. Boone was now locked into a version of events that the footage could test. Ortiz went to the patrol car, got Mercer's wallet, and looked at the credentials herself. Then she made a phone call to verify them. That should have happened much earlier, before the cuffs, before the search, before the stop dragged out in front of a growing crowd. After that call, the tone changed fast. Ortiz opened the patrol car door and told Mercer he was being released. The cuffs came off. Mercer stepped out and looked at the inside of his SUV. Papers were scattered, his work bag had been emptied, his things had been moved around during the search. He asked the questions Boone had avoided from the start. What was the reason for the stop? What justified the detention? What justified the search? Ortiz gave the standard answer departments use when they know the facts are bad. She called it a misunderstanding. Mercer knew better. This was not confusion. Boone had seen federal credentials and kept going. He had ordered a detention, backed a search, ignored repeated requests for a supervisor, and changed the reason for the stop once a supervisor arrived. That was the roadside record so far. And Mercer understood something Boone didn't yet. The stop was over. The evidence part was just starting. Daniel Mercer didn't drive away and let it go. That was Boone's first real mistake after the stop itself. He assumed release would close the problem. It did the opposite. Mercer stood there for another minute and did what experienced people do when they know a case is already building. He took photos of the SUV. He photographed the inside, the papers out of place, the compartments that had been opened, the work bag that had been emptied. Then he photographed his wrists. The cuffs had left clear red marks. He also got contact information from the people who had recorded the stop. Some of them sent him their video files that same night. Boone had spent nearly an hour trying to control the scene. Now the scene was leaving with half a dozen witnesses. The next morning, Mercer went straight to his federal supervisor. He didn't come in emotional. He came in organized. Timeline first, stop location, approximate time, names and badge numbers, search, detention, firearm removal, refusal to explain the stop, refusal to call a supervisor until much later, shifting reasons once a sergeant arrived, then the videos, then the photos, then the marks from the cuffs. When a case is bad, people usually feel it. When a case is dangerous, people can document it. Mercer had both. The FBI treated it seriously from the start. They had to. This wasn't just a rough traffic stop. A local patrol officer had detained an undercover federal asset after seeing federal credentials, searched the vehicle anyway, handled a federally authorized weapon, and came close to accessing sensitive work material. That gets attention fast. Mercer also contacted a civil rights attorney. Her name was Rachel Kim. She reviewed the stop, the Bodycam issue, the witness footage, and the timing. Her reaction was simple. This had gone far enough to justify immediate federal action if the department started stonewalling or retaliating. That same day, the videos started moving. One clip showed Boone ordering Mercer out after looking at the credentials. Another showed Mercer staying calm, while Boone kept escalating. Another showed the release after the supervisor's call. The clip spread across TikTok, Instagram, and X before the department had its story straight. That mattered because once the public sees the scene before the agency writes the report, the usual cleanup gets harder. People were already asking the obvious questions. Why detain him after seeing the credentials? Why search the vehicle? Why did the reason for the stop change? Why did it take a supervisor's phone call to do what should have happened at minute 5? By the afternoon, local media had picked it up. Then bigger outlets followed. Mercer's name wasn't pushed into the story the way a normal victim's would be because of the federal angle and the sensitivity around his work, but the facts were bad enough on their own. A driver with federal identification had been cuffed, searched, and held while the officer's explanation shifted on camera. The department put out the usual statement. They said they were aware of the incident. They said they were reviewing it. They said they took allegations seriously. That language always shows up when an agency wants time more than truth. Rachel Kim didn't wait around for the department to get comfortable. She moved before they could settle into delay mode. Her first step was evidence preservation. She sent formal notice demanding that the department preserve Bodycam footage, dash cam footage, dispatch audio, CAD logs, GPS records, internal messages, search records, and every report tied to the stop. That's how serious lawyers work these cases. They don't start with outrage. They start by cutting off the escape routes. No missing video, no edited timeline, no claim later that something was automatically deleted. Then she started building the federal complaint. Not vague language, specific claims, unlawful detention, unreasonable search, retaliatory escalation after presentation of federal credentials, interference with a federally connected operation, potential exposure of sensitive material, failure to timely verify identity after being given the means to do it. She also focused on Boone's changing explanations because that's the kind of thing judges notice immediately. A stop with one clear basis is one thing. A stop with one reason, then another. Then a claim of aggression contradicted by video looks like post hoc justification. And courts don't like that game. The department could feel the pressure building inside the building before any injunction landed. Internal Affairs opened its review. Boone was told to prepare a statement. That's usually where officers try to line up the language. Mercer was evasive. Mercer was aggressive. Mercer created officer safety concerns. The problem this time was that the footage existed outside the department too. Witnesses had angles the Bodycam didn't. Once that happens, the report can't just be written for the file. It has to survive comparison. Boone was boxed in by his own choices. The sergeant, Lena Ortiz, now had a problem of her own. She hadn't started the stop, but she had arrived in the middle of it and inherited the mess. Her phone call had ended the detention, which helped Mercer, but it also showed something ugly about the department. Verification had always been available. Boone just didn't want to slow down enough to use it. That issue started climbing the chain fast. Command staff didn't just have a patrol problem anymore. They had a supervision problem. They had a training problem. And because the detainee was tied to federal work, they now had a federal court problem too. Kim filed for emergency relief before the department could settle into a defensive pattern. That was the turning point in the legal side. She argued that the court needed to step in quickly, because this was not just about damages later. It was about immediate protection of evidence, protection against retaliation, and protection against further interference with Mercer or material connected to his federal work. She asked for orders preventing destruction of records, restricting direct contact or retaliation by involved personnel, and forcing the department to preserve and identify all evidence tied to the stop. That filing changed the whole atmosphere. A lawsuit is one thing, emergency federal court attention is another. Agencies can drag their feet on complaints. They get very alert when a judge starts asking questions. Boone probably still thought this was about whether the stop looked bad. He was behind. The issue had already moved past optics. Now it was about whether his actions had crossed into a constitutional violation with federal consequences attached. Once that happens, the badge doesn't protect the officer the way he thought it would. The department's legal team had to respond fast. They reviewed the footage. They reviewed dispatch. They reviewed the stop report. That's when the mismatch became impossible to ignore. Boone's first reason didn't hold. The second reason looked weak. The aggression claim didn't fit the video. Mercer's requests for a supervisor were there. His refusal to consent to the search was there too. This wasn't a close case. That's the problem with body cams when the officer forgets they're not just for his side. They record the parts he wishes were never said. Inside the department, people started reacting the way they always do when they realize federal court may get there before internal review does. Some wanted Boone cut loose immediately. Some wanted to call it a bad stop and contain it. Some were more worried about the federal relationship than the stop itself. That happens a lot too. Departments can ignore regular people for years and suddenly become very respectful when another badge is involved. It's ugly, but it's real. Mercer didn't care about their panic. He cared about the record. He and Kim kept tightening the case. Witness videos were logged. Photos were dated, names were confirmed, public statements from the department were compared against what the footage actually showed. Every hour that passed made it harder for the agency to pretend the stop had just gotten messy by accident. Boone had seen the credentials. He had time to verify. He kept pushing. That was the core fact, and it kept surviving every review. Then word came back that the federal court was taking the emergency request seriously. The federal court didn't wait long. That's what really shook the department. Not the social media clips, not the news coverage, not the angry calls. The court moved. Once Rachel Kim's emergency filing landed with the videos, the photos, the report issues, and the federal connection, the department lost the luxury of dragging this out internally. A judge ordered immediate preservation of all evidence tied to the stop and put restrictions in place to prevent interference or retaliation while the case moved forward. That injunction changed everything inside the building. It told command staff this was no longer a public relations issue. It was now a federal court matter with direct oversight. The department reacted the only way it could. Fast. Aaron Boone was pulled from patrol almost immediately. His weapon and department vehicle were taken pending review. He was placed on administrative status, while internal affairs and department lawyers tried to get in front of the collapse. The backup officer was also removed from regular field duty, while his role in the search was reviewed. Sergeant Lena Ortiz stayed on paper, but her handling of the stop, especially the delay before intervention, was folded into a supervisory review. The department didn't call it a shakeup in public at first. That's exactly what it was. Schedules changed, assignments changed, command meetings stacked up. People who had ignored warning signs before were suddenly forced to explain what training had actually been given and what discipline had not been used. That federal injunction also forced another ugly question into the open. What if Mercer hadn't been tied to federal work? What if he had just been another driver with no leverage, no federal chain behind him, no attorney moving this fast, and no witnesses willing to preserve the footage? That question hung over the whole case because everyone knew the answer. The stop might have been buried as a routine detention. Boone might have written the report his way and walked it through review like nothing serious had happened. The video stopped that. The court stopped that. Mercer's discipline stopped that. But the real problem was that the department had systems that still allowed officers to think they could get away with this in the first place. Internal affairs started going through Boone's record. That part mattered more than the department wanted to admit. Once an officer is caught in a high-profile stop like this, investigators stop looking only at the one incident. They start asking whether this was the first time or just the first time the footage got too strong to ignore. Boone's prior complaints came back into focus. So did his use of force history. So did prior allegations involving black male drivers. Those complaints had not led to serious consequences before. Now they were being read in a different light, not as isolated friction, as warning signs the department had chosen to live with. That's how departments create their own scandals, not only through one officer's ego. Through years of low-grade tolerance, the legal pressure kept building. Kim didn't let the injunction become symbolic. She used it as leverage. Every preserved record mattered now. Dispatch logs, body cam timing, supervisor contact delay, search sequence, stop report language. Once the paperwork was compared against the footage, Boone's position got worse. His claimed reasons for the stop didn't line up cleanly. His description of Mercer's behavior looked weaker every time the videos were replayed. The department's lawyers understood the danger right away. If this went deeper into the discovery, the case would not stay limited to Boone's decisions on one roadside shoulder. It could spread into training failures, complaint handling, and command knowledge. That's the kind of case city attorneys hate, because it turns one ugly event into a map of the whole system. Mercer stayed quiet in public. Smart move. He let the evidence do the talking. That usually lands harder than speeches. He had already done the important part. He had stayed calm during the stop. He had documented the damage right after. He had moved fast the next morning. He had not given Boone any noise to hide behind. So when the department started trying to soften its language, the record kept beating them back. The department finally made a stronger public move once it became clear the federal court was not going to let this drift. Boone was suspended pending final disposition. The backup officer was reassigned. A command-level review was announced into traffic stop practices, search authority, identity verification procedures, and handling of interactions involving outside agencies or federal personnel. That sounds technical. It was really an admission that the department had a patrol culture problem and had been forced to face it all at once. Then came the part that really stung. Outside review. Once a department loses trust in its own process, or looks like it has, outside oversight starts getting more support. City officials wanted distance. Federal officials wanted reliability. Community leaders wanted proof that this wasn't going to be handled with one quiet suspension and a memo nobody read. The department had to open itself up more than it wanted. That meant more scrutiny on training files, more scrutiny on complaint histories, and more scrutiny on how officers were taught to respond when a stop stops making sense. Boone's detention of Mercer had forced the agency into a position it never wanted to be in, explaining its habits under pressure instead of hiding them inside policy language. For Boone, the career damage was already done. Even before the final outcome, he had become the face of a case no department wants attached to its patch. A patrol officer sees federal credentials and escalates anyway. He searches anyway. He cuffs anyway. Then he changes the reason for the stop once a supervisor shows up. That combination is poison in court and poison inside a command staff meeting. Officers can survive mistakes. They usually don't survive footage that makes the mistake look stubborn. Boone hadn't just made a bad call. He had kept making worse ones after he had chances to stop. That's what ended him. Mercer's side got what mattered most first: protection of the record, protection against quiet retaliation, immediate court attention. After that came the broader consequences. Policy changes were pushed. Verification procedures were tightened. Supervisors were told to respond faster in disputed stops involving claimed official credentials. Training blocks were revised around search limits, detention thresholds, and roadside escalation. Departments love acting like reform takes years. Funny how quickly changes appear when a federal judge is watching. And Mercer, he got something more important than a speech from the chief or some carefully worded apology. He got the truth locked into the record before the department could smother it. That matters a lot, because dignity means very little if the paperwork says the officer was right and the video disappears. Mercer made sure that didn't happen. That's the lesson in this case. Boone thought authority would carry him through the stop. Mercer understood something bigger. Calm matters. Documentation matters. Oversight matters. And once an officer starts making decisions to protect his pride instead of the law, the badge stops helping him and starts becoming evidence against him. What would you have done in Mercer's position? And do you think departments act faster only when the person they target has power behind him? Put your thoughts in the comments. Share the story with somebody who needs to hear it, and subscribe for more stories like this.
Hands up, don't move.
My hands are up. I'm federal law enforcement.
Get on the ground.
Federal air marshal on active duty. You need to verify that through the proper channel.
On the ground, now.
What happens when a county deputy puts an undercover federal officer in handcuffs inside a crowded airport terminal because of a false report? One bad call had already turned a boarding gate into a security scene, and the deputy still did not understand that the man on the floor was a federal air marshal on active duty. Was this careful response work, or a deputy forcing the wrong call all the way through? That is why this confrontation blew up the moment the footage spread. Tell me where you're watching from. If you follow stories about body cam mistakes, bad detentions, and real accountability, like the video and subscribe. This case shows how fast one bad decision can turn into a federal problem. Deputy Mason Kerr got the alert while working airport support in Terminal B. Dispatch told him a man near Gate 22 had a firearm and was acting suspiciously. That kind of call changes everything in an airport. Kerr moved through the concourse fast, past a row of passengers waiting near the boarding lane, and found the man standing near the seating area with a carry-on beside him. The man was Julian Cross, a federal air marshal. Cross was dressed like any ordinary traveler because that was how the job worked. He was there to blend in, board the flight, and stay unnoticed unless something went wrong. He was not supposed to be identified in front of passengers. He was not supposed to be the center of a public confrontation. The second Kerr stepped in and started giving loud commands, that assignment was already in trouble. Kerr did not start with questions. He drew his weapon, ordered Cross to raise his hands, and told him not to move. People near the gates stopped what they were doing. Some backed away. Others turned toward the scene. A few took out their phones and started recording right away. Cross kept his hands visible and stayed still. He identified himself as federal law enforcement and said he was a federal air marshal on active duty. He said he had credentials and told Kerr to verify through the proper channel. Kerr kept his weapon up. That was the point where the stop stopped being controlled and started becoming a problem. No one would fault a deputy for taking an armed person call seriously in an airport. The problem was what happened after Cross identified himself. Kerr acted as if the statement meant nothing. He ordered Cross to the ground. Cross repeated that he was authorized to carry, that he had credentials, and that the deputy needed to verify before making the scene worse. Kerr kept pushing commands instead of slowing the encounter down. Cross got on the ground because he understood where this was heading. He did not argue in circles. He did not make sudden movements. He kept speaking in a clear voice and repeated the same basic facts. He was a federal air marshal. He was armed legally. This had to be verified through the right contact. Kerr cuffed him anyway. That changed the whole scene in seconds. Now, passengers were watching a man get handcuffed after he had already identified himself as federal law enforcement. Boarding slowed down. Airline staff looked over from the desk. A parent moved a child farther back from the gate lane. The people standing there did not know whether they were watching a real threat get stopped or a deputy making a huge mistake. Cross told Kerr the detention was compromising a federal assignment. He told him again to verify through airport command and federal channels. Kerr answered like a man who had already locked himself into the first version of events. He said credentials had to be confirmed. That sounds fine until you look at what he had already done. He had gone to a drawn weapon, forced Cross to the floor, and put him in cuffs in public before handling the one verification step that should have come first after the federal identification. Kerr searched Cross and found federal credentials. That should have ended it. It did not. Kerr looked at the credentials and said they could be fake. He told Cross to stay quiet. He told nearby travelers to back up. Then he got on the radio and said he had an armed subject claiming to be a federal agent. That wording made everything worse. Another deputy arrived. An airport operations supervisor came over because boarding had slowed and people were asking questions. A Transportation Security Administration duty manager was pulled in because the gate area was starting to look like an active security event. Kerr gave the same explanation each time. Armed man, suspicious behavior, claims federal status, credentials not confirmed. The issue was not that he wanted confirmation. The issue was that he had already made the detention public before doing the check that mattered most. Cross was still on the floor in cuffs. His face was visible to half the gate area. Anyone boarding that flight now had a reason to remember him. For an undercover federal air marshal, that is not a minor problem. That can destroy the whole purpose of the assignment. This is where these Bodycam cases become easy to read. An officer trying to solve the problem acts one way. An officer trying to defend his own earlier decision acts another way. Kerr looked like he was doing the second one. The airport supervisor asked whether the man had provided identification. Kerr said yes, but it had not been verified. Cross repeated the same statement he had made from the start. He identified his agency, said he was on active duty, and asked for a supervisor and federal confirmation. He stayed calm. He did not resist. He did not behave like a threat. Kerr still treated him like one. More travelers stopped to watch. More phones went up. People started guessing. Some thought Cross was an armed suspect. Some thought he was pretending to be law enforcement. Others were starting to realize the deputy might be in the wrong. That is how public confusion spreads in real time. People do not need full facts. They just need a scene big enough to start filling in the blanks themselves. Then Sergeant Leah Barton arrived. She moved in, got Kerr's summary, and heard the same version he had already told everyone else. Armed man near the gate. Suspicious conduct. Claimed to be a federal air marshal. Credentials not verified. Then she addressed Cross directly. He identified himself again, said he was on duty, and told her to contact federal dispatch immediately. Barton understood the problem right away. A false report inside an airport is serious. A county deputy publicly detaining an undercover federal air marshal is worse. At that point, she knew the next few minutes would decide whether this stayed a bad stop or turned into a full interagency disaster. That was how it started. One false report, one deputy who escalated before verifying, one federal officer exposed in front of a terminal full of travelers. And the scene was still building. Sergeant Leah Barton knew right away that she was not looking at a normal airport detention. She had a county deputy holding an armed man in cuffs near a boarding gate. That man was calm, specific, and consistent. He said he was a federal air marshal. He said he was on active duty. He said the deputy needed to verify through federal channels immediately. None of that matched the usual behavior of someone bluffing through a bad stop. Barton told Deputy Mason Kerr to step back and stop talking over him. Then she asked Julian Cross to identify himself again. Cross did. Same answer. Same tone. Federal air marshal. Active assignment. Armed by authority. Immediate verification required. He did not try to make a speech. He did not over-explain. He gave her the exact information she needed and nothing extra. That mattered. People who are lying usually start adding things. Cross did not. Barton took the credentials from Kerr and looked at them herself. They appeared legitimate. Federal seal. Proper formatting. Agency identification. That did not end the problem because appearance alone was not enough. But it changed the issue. Now the question was no longer whether Cross had identified himself. He had. The question was why Kerr had kept escalating after that point. Barton asked Kerr exactly what Cross had done before the detention. Kerr said dispatch reported an armed, suspicious man near the gate and that Cross matched the description. Barton asked whether Cross had threatened anyone. Kerr said no. She asked whether he had displayed the firearm. Kerr said no. She asked whether he had refused commands. Kerr tried to frame it as non-compliance, but the Bodycam was already telling a cleaner story than he was. Cross had identified himself, kept his hands visible, and asked for verification. That was not the same as resistance. This was where the stop started falling apart. A Transportation Security Administration duty manager came back over and asked whether the gate needed to be cleared. An airline supervisor wanted to know if the flight had to be delayed. Passengers were still filming from the seating area. A few had moved farther away, but most stayed because people always stay when something public and confusing is happening. Barton now had two problems at once. She had to contain the crowd, and she had to figure out whether her deputy had just exposed an undercover federal officer in front of a live departure. She ordered one deputy to move the bystanders back and told airport staff to pause boarding until she gave an answer. Then she got on the radio herself. That was the moment the verification fight really started. Airport Command did not have immediate confirmation. That was not unusual. These assignments are not broadcast openly to every local unit in a terminal. Barton then tried to reach the federal contact line through the airport law enforcement desk. That took time. More time than it should have. More time than Kerr's decision had left them. Cross was still in cuffs while all of this played out. He told Barton that every extra minute made the damage worse. He was right. His face was already known to the passengers around that gate. Anyone on that flight with bad intentions had now seen law enforcement publicly identify him as someone special enough to detain hard and argue over. Even if nobody around the gate understood exactly what he was, they knew he was not just a random traveler anymore. That alone was a security failure. Kerr still wanted to defend the stop. He told Barton he could not just trust a badge and a claim in an airport. That line sounds strong until you compare it to what actually happened. Nobody was asking him to trust blindly. Cross had asked him to verify. Barton was now doing exactly that. The issue was that Kerr had chosen force first and procedure second. And this is where some officers get themselves buried. They think if the first move was aggressive enough, they have to keep justifying it to avoid looking weak. That never works once supervisors and cameras catch up. Barton asked Kerr when he first saw the credentials. He hesitated. That told her enough before he even answered. He admitted he had found them during the search after putting Cross on the ground and cuffing him. Barton asked why he did not pause the detention right there and call for confirmation before continuing the public hold. Kerr said the credentials could have been fake. Barton asked what training factor, specific behavior, or visible inconsistency made him think they were fake. He did not have much. He went back to the dispatch call. Suspicious man, armed subject, airport setting. That was not a full answer. That was a loop. Cross cut in and made the point directly. He said the deputy had already made up his mind before the verification ever started. He was right again. Barton did not argue with him. She kept working the radio. Then Airport Command finally reached the right federal contact chain. Not directly, indirectly. Through a secure routing process that should have happened earlier and privately, not in the middle of a packed gate area with a man in cuffs and half the terminal filming. The wait was brutal because nobody at the scene could speed it up. That is the ugly part of these moments. Once an officer creates the wrong kind of urgency, everyone else has to fix it using systems that do not move at panic speed. Passengers kept reacting in real time. One woman near the charging station said out loud that the man had told them he was law enforcement from the start. Another passenger said the deputy probably had to assume the worst. A third said this should never be happening in public if the man was federal. All of them were partly right. That is why the scene was so bad. Every side of it looked wrong at once. Kerr then made the mistake that really exposed what was driving him. He said within earshot of the crowd that people pretend to be agents all the time and that he was not going to get played in his own terminal. That line landed badly. First, it was not his terminal. He was support personnel in a shared airport environment with local, airport, federal, and aviation authority interests overlapping in the same space. Second, that statement made the stop sound personal. It did not sound like careful procedure. It sounded like pride. Cross answered in a flat voice. He said this was never about Kerr being careful. It was about Kerr refusing to slow down once federal credentials appeared. That was the mask-off moment. From there, the whole thing changed. Barton knew it. The Transportation Security Administration manager knew it. Even the other deputies knew it. This was no longer a deputy holding the line during a tense airport call. This was a deputy who had taken a false report, ignored a federal identification, exposed an undercover air marshal, and then kept arguing because he did not want to reverse himself in front of civilians. Then the confirmation came in. Federal dispatch confirmed that Julian Cross was an active federal air marshal assigned to duty travel connected to that gate area. That ended the factual dispute completely. Barton told Kerr to remove the handcuffs. He did, but slowly and without saying much. Cross stood up, adjusted his jacket, and looked exactly like what he had been from the beginning, a trained federal officer who had just been publicly mishandled by a local deputy who did not know when to stop. Nobody around the gate missed that shift. A few passengers lowered their phones. Others kept recording because the release is often the most revealing part. That is when you see whether the officer apologizes, whether the supervisor takes control, whether anyone acts like the damage matters. Kerr did not apologize. He started to explain himself instead. He said he had to respond to the information he was given. Cross cut him off and said the response was not the issue. The failure was what happened after the identification. That was clean. Accurate, too. Barton told airport staff to keep the area clear and asked the Transportation Security Administration manager to coordinate with the airline on what came next for the flight. Cross then made the point nobody wanted to hear. His cover was gone. Everybody near that gate had seen his face. Any assignment tied to that boarding area was compromised. That was the line that turned the stop into an operational failure, not just a legal one. And standing there on the airport floor, with passengers still whispering and cameras still up, Kerr finally understood that this was not ending with a simple release and a note in a report. It was about to get much bigger than him. Once the cuffs came off, the scene did not calm down. It just changed shape. Julian Cross was no longer being treated as a suspect. Now he was the federal officer who had just been exposed in front of a terminal full of travelers because a county deputy refused to verify first. That is a very different kind of problem, and everyone around that gate knew it. Sergeant Leah Barton tried to lock the scene down fast. She told the other deputies to stop talking to passengers, stop speculating, and stop making the situation worse. She directed airport staff to keep boarding paused. She asked the airline supervisor for a list of gate personnel who had been present. She wanted names, positions, and a timeline. She was already thinking ahead because once federal supervisors got there, every minute of this would matter. Cross did not raise his voice. He did not grandstand. He stayed direct. He told Barton the assignment was compromised. He said that was not a guess. It was a fact. His face had been recorded from multiple angles. Travelers near the gate had seen him handcuffed, searched, and then released after a federal confirmation call. Even if nobody around that gate knew exactly what his role was, they knew he was not an ordinary passenger. That was enough to destroy the purpose of an undercover aviation assignment. Deputy Mason Kerr still tried to justify himself. He said he had responded to an armed person report in an airport and followed the threat as he saw it. That was the line he kept going back to because it was the only part of his conduct that sounded defensible. The problem was that nobody serious was focusing on the first 30 seconds anymore. The issue was the next several minutes. That was where he lost control of the law, the protocol, and the common sense of the encounter. Cross answered him in a way that ended the debate. He said the problem was never the initial contact. The problem was that Kerr ignored federal identification, escalated in public, and kept going after the facts had changed. That was the line that people would later repeat, because it was clean and it was true. Then the federal side arrived. A supervisory federal air marshal, Nathan Velez, came onto the terminal floor with airport command personnel after being briefed through dispatch. He did not need a long explanation. He took one look at Cross, one look at the gate area, and one look at the county deputies standing there, and he understood what had happened. He asked Barton one question first. Had the air marshal's identity been publicly exposed before federal confirmation was complete? Barton answered yes. That answer carried weight. There was no soft way to put it, no procedural language to hide behind. A local deputy had publicly detained an undercover federal air marshal in a live terminal based on a false report and had kept doing it after receiving credentials. Velez then asked Cross whether he could still board. Cross said no. That was the operational end of it. The flight was no longer his mission. The moment was. Airport staff had to sort out the immediate mess. The airline needed to know whether the delay would continue. The Transportation Security Administration duty manager had to document the terminal disruption. Airport command had to preserve radio logs, camera timestamps, and scene notes. Barton had to separate her deputy from the floor before he said anything else that made the department look worse. Kerr had gone from scene lead to liability in less than an hour. And this is where bad stops become career damage. Not at the moment of shouting, not at the moment of handcuffing, at the moment when every other professional in the room sees the same facts and understands that one officer kept pushing because he did not want to admit he was wrong. Kerr was pulled aside for an immediate debrief. He gave the same explanation again. Dispatch advised an armed, suspicious man. He responded with force. The credentials were not verified. He believed he had to maintain control. That explanation did not hold up under basic review. Barton asked whether Cross had threatened anyone. No. Whether he had displayed the firearm. No. Whether he had resisted commands after the stop began. No. Whether he had repeatedly requested verification through proper channels. Yes. Every answer made Kerr look worse. Cross gave his statement next. It was short, tight, professional. He explained where he had been positioned, how the initial commands were given, when he identified himself, when credentials were found, and how long the public detention continued after that point. He did not dramatize anything. He did not need to. A precise federal statement usually hits harder than an emotional one, because it gives everyone less room to argue. By then, the bystander videos were already moving. People from the gate had uploaded clips before the terminal was even fully cleared. The Bodycam footage was not public yet, but the passenger recordings were enough to light the fire. The first posts framed it as airport police arresting a federal officer. Others framed it as a deputy humiliating an undercover air marshal. Some people defended Kerr at first because airports are high-risk environments, and no one wants officers ignoring gun calls. That defense weakened once more. Details came out. The public could accept caution. What they had trouble accepting was refusal to verify after valid credentials appeared. Within 48 hours, the county sheriff's office announced an internal investigation. That bought them almost no goodwill because the footage kept spreading and the facts kept getting worse. Local news picked it up first. Then national outlets followed because the story had everything that makes a case travel. Airport setting, federal agent, false report, body cam, public detention, interagency failure, civil rights exposure. That combination always moves. The county tried the usual first response. It called the incident unfortunate. It said the deputy acted on a report of an armed, suspicious person. It said the matter was under review. That language failed because people had already seen enough to know the real question was not why he approached. The real question was why he kept going after the federal identification. Then the lawsuit came. Cross filed a federal civil rights suit against the county, the sheriff's department, and Deputy Mason Kerr individually. The claims were exactly what you would expect: unlawful detention, excessive force, public humiliation, operational compromise, reputational harm, failure to train, failure to supervise, federal mission interference. Once those claims were on paper, the county had a much bigger problem than a bad news cycle. And the lawsuit did not stay narrow. The complaint went after the system. It argued that the deputy's conduct exposed weak interagency training at a major airport, poor verification procedures for plainclothes federal officers, and a culture that let local officers treat every challenge as a test of authority. That is how civil cases really hurt departments. Not when they describe one bad moment, when they tie that moment to policy failure. Discovery made it worse. Internal training records showed deputies assigned to airport support had only limited practical instruction on handling contacts with undercover federal personnel. The procedures existed, but they were too general, too uneven, and too easy to ignore in a fast-moving scene. Kerr's own reports also hurt him. He had written the detention in a way that made him look more measured than the body cam later showed. That gap mattered. Once a report starts drifting away from the video, credibility drops hard. Cross's legal team also used the strongest part of the case: the timeline. Initial contact, federal identification, credentials found, public detention continues, supervisor arrives, verification delayed, federal confirmation received, cuffs removed, cover destroyed. That sequence was clear. It was ugly. It was enough. The county settled before trial. The number was high enough to hurt, high enough that local officials could not brush it off as the cost of doing business. The settlement did not just cover the detention itself. It reflected the public exposure, the ruined assignment, the federal-local breakdown, and the policy failures that let the stop get that far. Kerr did not survive it professionally. He was suspended first, then terminated. State certification review followed. That review focused on judgment, report accuracy, escalation after identification, and failure to follow airport response protocol. The department tried to distance itself from him, but that only went so far. When a deputy creates this kind of failure in a major terminal, command owns part of it too. They put him there. They trained him, or failed to. Changes came after that. The airport adopted new joint contact rules for local officers, airport police, and federal aviation personnel. The 2026 update required immediate supervisor involvement, the moment a plainclothes subject credibly identified as federal law enforcement in a secured aviation environment. It also required a verification hold model, meaning officers had to shift from public domination tactics to controlled confirmation steps unless there was an actual active threat in front of them. That distinction mattered. Armed presence alone was no longer enough to justify blowing through identification in a terminal. Departments also added scenario-based training on friendly force risk, undercover exposure, and interagency contact inside airports. That training came too late for Kerr, but that is how reform usually works. Somebody gets humiliated, somebody sues, taxpayers pay, and only then do agencies decide they should have trained better from the start. As for Cross, he did what trained federal officers usually do after a scene like that. He documented everything, stayed disciplined, and moved forward. The detention did not define him. The deputy's bad call did. That is an important difference. And that is the lesson in this case. An officer can respond fast and still think clearly. An officer can take a gun call seriously and still verify before turning a terminal into a spectacle. What destroys cases like this is not caution. It is ego. It is the refusal to stop once new facts show up. It is the need to win the scene instead of handle it. So, what do you think? Was Deputy Mason Kerr being careful? Or did he turn a false report into a public abuse of authority the second he ignored federal credentials? Have you ever seen a situation where someone in uniform kept pushing just because they did not want to admit they were wrong? Put your thoughts in the comments. Share the story with someone who needs to see how fast bad judgment can become a lawsuit. And subscribe for more stories like this.
You need to step out and explain that vehicle right now.
I already did. I'm part of the memorial program. The vehicle was cleared.
Parking restrictions still apply.
Then talk to event staff. They already handled it. Here, retired credentials.
I don't care who you are.
Hale.
Officer, you are making a mistake.
General Marcus Hale was a retired 3-star general. Officer Tyler Briggs was a rookie patrolman who still thought every situation had to become a test of authority. This rookie patrolman just made the biggest mistake of his life. A retired 3-star general was attending a memorial service for a fallen officer and veteran. The setting was solemn. Families were present. Active duty soldiers were in formation. Veterans stood in silence near the wreath line. Then Briggs stepped in, ignored the event protocol, ignored military credentials, and put handcuffs on the general in front of everyone. He thought he was enforcing order. What he was really doing was ending his own career on camera. And yes, it was all recorded. His Bodycam was running. Several people had phones out. Event staff had cameras too. There was no hiding what happened after that. Before we get into it, tell me where you're watching from. And if you like stories about ego, power, and instant accountability, like this video and subscribe. This happened at a Veterans Memorial Cemetery just outside the city. Police were there for traffic control and access points. Military personnel were there for the ceremony. Families were there to honor the dead. Everybody had a role. That matters. Marcus Hale was not there as a guest in the crowd. He was part of the memorial program. He had been invited to place a wreath for a fallen brigade commander he had once served with. People on the military side knew exactly who he was. The event organizers knew too. His arrival had already been coordinated. Briggs was assigned to vehicle control near the main approach road. It should have been simple work. Keep lanes clear, help late arrivals, stay out of the ceremony, unless something serious happened. He didn't do that. He saw a black sedan parked near a restricted curb close to the ceremony route. That car had been cleared for official event movement. Briggs either didn't know that or decided it didn't matter. He focused on the vehicle and made up his mind before asking a single useful question. By that point, Hale had already stepped away from the sedan and moved into place for the wreath presentation. He was dressed formally, wearing retired insignia and ribbons. He was exactly where he was supposed to be. Briggs walked straight toward the ceremony area and interrupted him. He told Hale to step out and explain the vehicle. He spoke like this was a routine enforcement stop. Wrong setting, wrong tone, wrong target. Hale stayed calm. He identified himself. He explained that he was part of the memorial service. He showed his retired military credentials. That should have ended it right there. It didn't. Briggs looked at the credentials and kept going. He said parking restrictions still applied. He said he didn't care who Hale was. Then he shifted from the car to Hale himself and started treating the situation like non-compliance. People nearby noticed fast. A military officer tried to explain that Hale was scheduled to participate in the ceremony. A cemetery staff member moved over and told Briggs the vehicle had already been cleared. A retired officer in the crowd tried to calm things down before the scene got worse. Briggs ignored all of them. That was the real problem. Not confusion, not lack of information. He was being given multiple chances to stop. He refused every one. Hale did not argue. He did not posture. He repeated the same basic facts. He was there for the service. His vehicle had been cleared. The memorial should continue without disruption. Briggs took that as resistance. He ordered Hale away from the wreath line. Hale stepped aside because he wasn't going to turn a memorial into a public fight. Briggs followed him and kept pressing. He demanded identification again, even though he had already been shown credentials. He started talking about interference with police duties. That's when younger officers nearby began to realize something was seriously off. One of them quietly radioed for a supervisor. Smart move. He could see this was going bad. Briggs kept escalating. He warned Hale that if he didn't comply immediately, he would be detained. Think about how absurd that was. A retired 3-star general at a memorial service, surrounded by soldiers, veterans, and grieving families. The issue had already been explained. The rookie still pushed forward because he had locked himself into it. Hale remained composed. He told Briggs he was making a mistake. He made no threatening move. He gave no reason for force. He stayed controlled in a way that made Briggs look even worse. Then Briggs reached for the handcuffs. That was the moment the whole thing changed. People stopped seeing it as a tense misunderstanding. They saw exactly what it was. A rookie officer letting ego run the scene in the worst possible place. Briggs pulled the cuffs out and moved in like the decision had already been approved by someone above him. It hadn't. General Hale did not pull away. He did not raise his voice. He did not give Briggs any excuse to claim threat, resistance, or disorderly conduct. He kept his hands visible and stayed still. That detail mattered later because the body cam made it impossible for Briggs to invent a struggle that never happened. Briggs told him he was being detained for interference. That claim was weak on its face. Hale had not blocked him, touched him, threatened him, or disrupted police operations. The real issue was simpler. Briggs had given an order in public. The general had calmly explained why the order made no sense in context, and the rookie could not handle that. So he cuffed him. He put handcuffs on a retired 3-star general at a memorial service in front of active duty soldiers, veterans, police officers, cemetery staff, and grieving families. That single act turned a bad judgment call into a department-wide emergency. People reacted immediately. Several soldiers broke posture and looked toward the scene. One older veteran stepped forward before another attendee stopped him, probably because everybody understood that one more person entering the scene could make Briggs even worse. A woman near the front row pulled out her phone with shaking hands. Another person was already recording from the side walkway. A local reporter who had been covering the memorial lifted a camera toward the disturbance. Briggs had managed to create the exact kind of public humiliation that departments spend months trying to avoid. Hale still stayed controlled. He did not plead. He did not argue for the crowd. He stated the basic facts again. He was there as part of the ceremony. His vehicle had been cleared. The officer was making a serious mistake. He spoke like a man used to command, but without ego. That contrast made Briggs look even more reckless. Briggs responded by tightening his grip and walking Hale farther away from the wreath line. That made it worse. Now the memorial itself was visibly disrupted. Families turned in their seats. Soldiers on ceremonial duty were distracted. Event staff stopped watching the program and started watching the arrest. The entire point of police presence at an event like that is to protect order and dignity. Briggs did the opposite in under 2 minutes. A younger patrol officer near the lane control post got on the radio again, this time less quietly. He requested a supervisor to respond to the ceremony area immediately. His tone told the story. Something had gone very wrong. Briggs either didn't hear it or thought he could still push through. He started defending his decision out loud to the people around him. He treated every correction as interference. He treated every explanation as a challenge to his authority. That's the trap weak officers fall into. They stop enforcing actual rules and start defending their pride. A military captain moved towards the edge of the scene and identified Hale's role in the service. Briggs dismissed him too. A cemetery coordinator tried again to explain the access arrangement for the vehicle. Briggs cut him off. An older retired officer from the city's police department told Briggs he needed to slow down and think. Briggs ignored him as well. At that point, he wasn't managing a situation. He was fighting reality. Hale was then led several yards away from the ceremony path and positioned near a marked patrol unit. Briggs kept talking, kept justifying, kept acting like the problem was everyone else. Refusing to recognize his authority, Hale remained calm and compliant, which stripped Briggs of the usual excuses officers use after the fact. Then another thing hit Briggs, and it clearly hit him too late. 2 junior officers nearby had recognized the name Marcus Hale. One of them knew exactly who he was. Not vaguely, not maybe. He knew. He had seen the event sheet. He had seen the military guest list. He stepped closer, looked at Briggs, then at the handcuffed general, and realized this was now beyond embarrassing. This was a command level bad. He got on the radio and pushed harder for supervision. That call finally brought Sergeant Elena Ruiz. Ruiz had been handling perimeter issues near the main gate when the urgent request came through. She arrived fast, saw the crowd formation before she even reached the center path, and knew this was not normal event noise. Then she saw Hale in cuffs. That changed everything instantly. Ruiz knew who he was. She also knew what this would look like once the footage moved beyond that cemetery. A retired general, invited participant, memorial setting, public handcuffing, multiple witnesses. There was no soft landing left. She walked straight into the scene and demanded an explanation. Briggs started giving one. He said he had encountered non-compliance connected to a restricted vehicle. He said Hale had interfered with a police directive. He tried to frame the arrest as a straightforward enforcement action. Ruiz looked at Hale, looked at the cuffs, looked at the soldiers and families watching, and understood that Briggs had just handed Internal Affairs a gift-wrapped case. She asked one key question first. Had Hale threatened anyone or resisted physically? The answer was no. Everybody knew it. The Bodycam knew it too. Then she asked whether Briggs had been informed that Hale was part of the memorial program and that the vehicle had been event cleared. Again, yes, more than once. That was the break point. Briggs still tried to defend himself. He kept talking about consistency, rules, and not letting status affect enforcement. On paper, that sounds tough. In context, it was nonsense. Nobody had asked him to ignore the law for a powerful person. They had told him he was misreading the situation from the start. Ruiz then turned to Hale, addressed him properly, and told another officer to remove the cuffs. That was the moment Briggs lost control of the scene for good. Every person standing there understood what had just happened. The supervisor had not come in to support the rookie. She had come in, assessed it in seconds, and reversed him in public. And Briggs still didn't fully get it. Instead of shutting up, he started arguing with his own sergeant. He insisted he had lawful grounds. He said backing off would undermine police authority on scene. He was so deep in the mistake by then that he thought doubling down might save him. It did the opposite. Because the second he challenged Ruiz on that scene, in front of witnesses, he changed the problem from bad judgment to insubordination, wrapped inside a public misconduct incident. Hale's cuffs came off. Red marks were visible on his wrists. He rubbed them once, straightened his coat, and did not make a spectacle of it. He did not demand theatrics. He did not turn it into a speech. He just stood there with more discipline than the officer who had arrested him. That image stuck with everyone watching. Ruiz ordered Briggs to step back and say nothing else until command arrived. By then, command had already been notified. Not just police command either. Word had moved to the event liaison, then to department leadership, and almost at the same speed to the nearby military installation. Once names started crossing radios and phones, the scale of the mistake became obvious. This wasn't a messy local complaint that might sit in a file for weeks. This was happening live at a memorial, with a retired 3-star general and multiple agencies now aware of it. Briggs had wanted to prove he was in charge. Now he had the command staff, military brass, and soon internal affairs moving toward him, all because he couldn't admit early on that he had misread a parked car. That's how careers end fast, not always from one bad thought, from refusing every chance to stop. Captain Andrew Cole arrived less than 5 minutes later. By then, the ceremony had not fully recovered. The crowd was still watching, and Briggs was standing off to the side with the look of an officer who knew the ground had shifted under him but still hadn't accepted how bad it was. Cole took in the scene fast. General Hale had been uncuffed. Sergeant Ruiz was controlling the area. 2 junior officers were visibly uncomfortable, and several attendees were still recording. Cole had enough experience to understand what that meant. He did not need a long briefing to know this was already bigger than the cemetery. He went straight to Ruiz first. Smart move. He wanted the clean version before Briggs started trying to rewrite it. Ruiz gave it to him in order. Briggs had approached Hale over a vehicle position near the restricted curb. Hale had identified himself and explained he was a scheduled participant in the memorial. Multiple people, including military personnel and event staff, had confirmed the same thing. Briggs had ignored the explanations, treated the exchange as non-compliance, and handcuffed Hale for interference. No threat, no physical resistance, no public disorder caused by Hale. Just escalation by the officer. That summary was enough. Cole then turned to Briggs and gave him one chance to explain himself. Briggs tried. He said he was enforcing a restricted area. He said he could not allow exceptions based on status. He said Hale had challenged his authority in front of a crowd and refused to follow direction. It was a terrible defense because it exposed the actual problem. He was still talking about authority as if the issue was personal disrespect instead of judgment, protocol, and restraint. Cole cut him off. He asked the question that mattered most. Had Briggs been informed that the vehicle was event cleared and that Hale was part of the memorial program? Briggs admitted that people had said that, yes. That answer killed the rest of his defense right there. Because once he admitted he had been told, more than once, what the actual situation was, this stopped being a misunderstanding. It became a conscious decision to ignore context, ignore corrections, and escalate anyway. Cole's face changed at that point. Not dramatic, just colder. He knew what this meant for the department. He also knew the footage would be brutal. He told Briggs to surrender his Bodycam unit at the end of the scene, remain silent unless directly questioned, and stay separated from the event. Then he told another officer to pull Briggs from active public contact immediately. That happened right there, in front of other officers, and Briggs still made it worse. Instead of staying quiet, he tried one more time to argue. He said backing him down in front of civilians would make the department look weak. He said officers had to stand by enforcement decisions once made. That line finished him. A seasoned supervisor hears that and understands the officer still hasn't learned the lesson. He's not showing regret. He's showing attachment to the ego that caused the problem. Cole shut that down on the spot and told him he was no longer part of the event operation. At the same time, another track was moving fast behind the scene. The chief had already been notified. Not through rumor, through command. The initial call up the chain was urgent because the names involved forced it to be urgent. A retired 3-star general had been handcuffed at a memorial by a rookie officer after being identified and vouched for on scene. There's no version of that report that sits quietly until Monday. The local base commander had also been informed. The military liaison attached to the event made sure of that. By then, police command was not just thinking about discipline. They were thinking about interagency damage, public trust, press response, and whether they had just insulted an entire military community in one of the worst settings possible. General Hales still handled it with more control than anyone had a right to expect. He did not grandstand. He did not demand special treatment. He answered Cole briefly, confirmed the sequence, and made clear that the ceremony should be allowed to continue with as little disruption as possible. That matters, because it stripped away any excuse that emotions had confused the scene. Hale stayed composed. The officer did not. Cole apologized directly to him, publicly, short and clear. He did not try to bury it in vague language. He acknowledged that what happened was unacceptable. That helped a little, not enough to undo it, but enough that everyone watching saw the department was no longer pretending the rookie had a case. Then came the practical problem. The memorial itself had to continue. Event staff moved fast. Soldiers reset formation. The wreath placement was reorganized. Families were guided back to the service. Ruiz and 2 other officers widened the perimeter so Briggs was out of sight. Cole stayed on scene because there was no way he was letting this spiral again. The ceremony resumed, but the damage had already been done. People in attendance were texting. Some were already uploading clips. A local reporter had enough footage to frame the whole incident before lunch. Several active duty members had names, times, and badge numbers written down. The department was not going to get a private version of this story. And then the real internal collapse started. Once Briggs was moved away from the crowd, Cole had him stand by near the vehicles and asked for a direct timeline. Briggs repeated the same logic again: restricted zone, refusal, interference, neutral enforcement. Every word made him look worse, because none of it addressed the central fact. He had been corrected repeatedly and ignored it. Cole asked whether Hale had threatened him, whether Hale had tried to leave, and whether Hale had physically interfered with an officer. All answers were no. Whether military personnel and event staff had explained the situation before the cuffs went on. Yes, there it was. A lot of officers sink themselves because they think if they keep sounding firm, the chain of command will respect the confidence. Real supervisors don't respect that. They hear immaturity, especially when the facts are this bad. Cole then made the call that effectively ended Briggs's day and probably his career. He told dispatch to mark Briggs out of service, pending administrative review, and requested an internal affairs response package be started immediately. Not later. Not after a cooling off period. Immediately. That's rare for a reason. Departments usually buy time. They separate the officer, gather footage, issue a neutral statement, and move slowly. Cole skipped the usual delay because the incident had too many witnesses, too much documentation, too little ambiguity, and too much external pressure already building. He understood the department could not afford to look hesitant. Briggs finally started to understand the scale of it then. Not because of principle, because of consequences. He asked whether this was really necessary. He said nobody had been hurt. He said he was just doing his job. That line landed badly. He'd humiliated a retired general at a memorial and disrupted a service for the dead, and he was still framing it as routine enforcement under stress. Cole told him this was not routine, not defensible, and not staying in-house as a quiet coaching matter. That's the point where rookie confidence usually breaks. Not when civilians object. Not when bystanders record. When command looks them in the face and makes it clear the department will not carry the mistake for them. Briggs had started that morning thinking a restricted curb line was going to be his little test of authority. Now he was standing beside a patrol unit, pulled from duty, watched by his own supervisors, while command staff prepared an emergency review over an arrest that should never have happened. And the day still wasn't over. Because once the ceremony ended, the paperwork started. Then, the footage review. Then, the calls from downtown. Then the questions nobody in his chain could answer for him. That's when a bad scene turns into a short career. By that afternoon, the department had everything it needed. Bodycam footage, radio traffic, event notes, phone video from witnesses. The facts were clear. Briggs had been told who Hale was. He had been told the vehicle was cleared. He had been corrected more than once. He still put cuffs on him. That made the review move fast. The chief was briefed the same day. The city manager was notified. The base commander's office also got involved. This was no longer just a bad moment at a memorial. It was now a public failure with cameras, military leadership, and city leadership all watching. That evening, the department released a statement. They admitted a retired senior military officer had been improperly detained during the service. They called it a failure of judgment and professionalism. Internal affairs started immediately. Briggs gave the same defense again. Restricted vehicle, non-compliance, equal enforcement. It went nowhere. The issue was not Hale's rank. The issue was that Briggs ignored the facts in front of him and kept escalating. The video spread fast. Veterans groups were furious. The local community was furious. Even people who usually defended police had no patience for this one. The setting made it impossible to excuse. He had disrupted a memorial and humiliated a retired general in front of grieving families. Hale kept his response measured. The next morning, he gave a short statement. He said public service requires humility, judgment, and restraint. That line stayed with people because it summed up the whole thing better than any department press release. Less than 24 hours after the memorial, Briggs was fired. The department cited improper detention, failure to follow event protocol, disregard of supervisory correction, and damage to public trust. He turned in his badge, his weapon, and the rest of his equipment. His career ended almost as soon as it started. And that's the real point. This was not one split-second mistake. He had chances to stop. He had chances to listen. He had chances to correct himself. He ignored every one of them. After that, the department ordered retraining for ceremonial assignments, military coordination, and rookie supervision. They had to. A small issue had turned into a public disgrace because one officer cared more about winning than thinking. Hale's final message was simple. Authority means nothing without discipline. That was the lesson. Briggs thought backing down would make him look weak. Instead, refusing to back down cost him his badge, his job, and his future. Let me know what you would have done if you had seen that happen in person. And if you've ever watched someone in uniform let ego take over common sense, put your thoughts in the comments. Share the story with someone who needs to hear it and subscribe for more.